Let's say you're on set and you're filming with two different cameras. Let's say maybe a Canon and a Sony. And this actually happened to me before. I shot a wedding with a friend and he had a Canon, I had a Sony. And then you have to go back and edit this footage together. You want them to look seamless because you don't want the color shifts to look jarring, and this way it doesn't take anybody out of the experience. The people over at FilmConvert made a plugin called Cinematch, and it does the hard work for you. So I used the plugin for DaVinci Resolve. In this video, I give you 3 different examples. There are timestamps in the description below. This way, if you want to jump ahead, you can. And if you have any questions after watching the video, leave a question in the comment section below. But for right now, let's take a look. So I have 6 clips here from 2 different cameras. 3 from a Panasonic and 3 from a Sony. So here we have the Panasonic footage. This is the Sony. Same thing, Panasonic, Sony, same scene. 1 for Panasonic and 1 from the Sony. Now the first thing that we actually want to do is go into the project settings. I'm going to come down to color management. You'll notice here it's set to DaVinci YRGB. There is a color managed option. In this case, for this particular plugin, we're not going to use the color managed one. So we can leave it at the YRGB. Come up to the top, change it from clip to timeline in our node tree. And then we'll go ahead, and if you don't have OpenFX, go ahead and click on OpenFX at the top. We'll find our Cinematch plugin and we'll apply it to our footage. I'll go ahead and minimize this screen right here. Let's come up to the top of the plugin and we're going to choose which camera this is. So we'll open up this screen here, and this is the Panasonic. Now I shot on G9. Basically the GH5 has the same sensor. It's a 20 megapixel sensor. So in this case, even though it's not the same, we'll choose that. I shot it in Vlog-L, and we have the option for limited and full. In this case, we'll just leave it at the limited. That's more for if you're recording to an outside recorder. I'll click on Apply Rec 709 Transform, and you'll see that the footage changes from that flat footage to this more contrasty footage. And because this was applied at the timeline level, I'll go through all the clips and you'll see that they aren't that flat footage anymore, and they all have added contrast. I'll come over and choose that first clip again. First thing I want to change is the timeline back to clip. Now what we'll do is apply the Cinematch plugin to that and go through all the same options. And the reason that we're doing this is because we want any settings that we adjust here, so any of the adjustments below will react as if it was that particular camera. So having said that, I'm going to choose the option for a white balance picker and then choose that gray wall behind my head. And it did make a little bit of an adjustment. You can see that on the temperature and tint adjustments. Now for the Sony footage, I'm going to choose Sony, obviously, and then the RX105. I'm going to choose S-Log and the XAVCS option, and then we'll leave it at the limited also. Then we can come into our target options and we can match the camera that we're trying to match to. And again, we're doing this so that any adjustments we make react as if it were that camera. So with my Sony footage selected, I'm going to come up to the top. That second icon from the left is split screen. You'll notice the white box goes around the footage. Up here it says selected clips, and then we just have to select the other clip. So I'll hold down Control, click on the one on the left, and now we have both our Panasonic on the left and our Sony on the right. I'll change this to timeline because now we're going to adjust the exposure so that they match. So I'll click on exposure middle gray. You'll notice there's a little difference between the exposure, obviously, with the green being more prominent in the Panasonic footage and not so much on the Sony. So now I'm adjusting the Sony. That's the one that we have selected with the white box around it. You saw that I chose clip. I'm adjusting the exposure setting, and now they're starting to look a little more similar. So let's change it back to timeline. I'll uncheck the exposure. And now the brights and darks start to look a lot more similar. Now I can already see that the Sony footage looks a little bit more green. So let's go ahead and go into tint. Staying under timeline, I'm going to choose the option for the tint. And now it becomes really obvious. So we don't make adjustments under exposure. I'll change that to the clip up top. And now I'll adjust the tint over on the Sony footage. One direction makes it more green, the other direction makes it more magenta. So the idea here is to match the footage as similar as possible to the image on the right. So we've removed that green cast It appears that there's a little bit of green maybe in my sweatshirt there. So we can lean a little bit to the green side. And I'm just scrolling my middle mouse wheel so that way I can get a little bit of a closer view. And it may not be 100% perfect, but they're starting to look very close. Again, I'll come up to the top, change it from clip to timeline. And then we'll uncheck tint, so this way we can see what the actual footage looks like. Next thing that I'll click on is the false color temp, and this is where we can adjust how cool or warm the footage is. I can already see that the Sony footage is extremely cool. You can see a lot of that blue, so we'll adjust this so that it takes the blue out of the sweatshirt and puts a little more orange in my face. Again, make sure that you change it from timeline to clip. And as mentioned, if we make the right adjustments, you can see that blue disappear from the shirt and how my face becomes a little more orange, and is very similar to what you see on the left hand side. Let's come back to timeline because we don't want to see the false color anymore. And now we can see our footage side by side. Now both of these pieces of footage are close as it is, but we can actually refine this a little bit more. I'll come back up to the top where it says timeline, change that back to clip. Now with that Sony footage selected, I'm going to right click and choose wipe timeline clip. So now you'll notice I can wipe between the two and compare them side by side. Because the orange outline is around the Sony clip, that's what we're going to be adjusting on the right hand side under the inspector. Now in order to move our footage around, what we want to go into is the sizing panel within DaVinci Resolve. Right now it's set to input sizing, and just in case you don't see that, let's say it's here on the curves, it's over here almost all the way to the right. We're going to change the input sizing to edit sizing, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But for right now, I can use the pan option and move the footage over. And we're doing that just in case the wipe doesn't facilitate the part of the footage that we want to see. So in some cases, you might not even have to do this. Now, in order for us to make our adjustments, we have to get out of the wipe screen there, and then I'll click on the left-hand side and choose the option for Open FX Overlay. And this brings up the window that you may have noticed that was open at the beginning of the tutorial. And we're going to stay in this window right here, the HSL curves. So I'm going to choose the eyedropper for source. This is what we want to change. So I'll click on the shirt, and the target is the one that we want to match it to. So I'll click on that part of the footage on the right hand side. Now in this case, they were very close, so it's hard to see if any adjustments were made, but I can see from a hue perspective that they pretty much match. I'm making some more adjustments on the sizing screen just so I can match them up better. This way I can see them side by side and see if it appears to be one continuous piece of footage. You'll notice in that box on the preview window, it does have RGB curves and color wheels, but we can actually adjust those settings right in the inspector window all the way on the right. It does appear our Sony footage is lacking a little bit of saturation, so I'll drill down, adjust the saturation again so that it looks like those two pieces of footage are one continuous piece of footage. Obviously we can use our scopes at the bottom, but also remember that the point of this is that when you switch between two different cameras, you don't want the footage to be jarring. You want them to be as similar as possible. So if it looks that way, then your audience will see it that way. And for the most part, they're starting to look very similar. One thing I do notice is that the skin looks more red in the Panasonic footage. I'll change the wipe just so we can do a little bit more of a side by side. Again, I can't see the skin, so let's go ahead and make the sizing adjustment. And that's what I was referencing before. And now we can see the skin side by side. Overall, the footage looks a little bit warm despite our adjustments before. So now I'm adjusting the temp over on the right-hand side. Right now, I'm keeping an eye on the skin, and I'm actually keeping an eye on the back wall also. Let's go ahead and wipe our footage, and it's definitely starting to look a lot more close. We also have a top-down option for the wipe, so I'll go ahead and do that. And the last thing I'm going to compare here are my lips. And from all those points, the hue, saturation, and the luminance, the lightness, it appears that they're almost identical, if not actually identical. The one last adjustment I do want to make has to do with those skin tones. I can still see that there's a little more yellow, maybe some more orange on the Sony footage, and the Panasonic is still that red color. So without adjusting the Panasonic, let's go ahead and adjust the Sony. I'm coming back under our HSL curves. We'll choose which one we want to be our source, and that's the one we're going to change. And then in the same area on that cheek, I'll choose the target on the Panasonic footage. And now our Sony footage is a lot more red. We'll change it from Open FX Overlay to Wipe. And we've pretty much dialed in our look. So now we have a different scene and we're going to go through the same process. This being the Panasonic footage. So again, we'll just go through all the options we did before, choose Panasonic, the GH5 because it's closest to the G9, Vlog L, and we'll leave it at limited. So we'll head over to the Sony footage, go ahead and apply the plugin, head to the top, choose what it actually is, and that would be the Sony, the RX105, the S-Log2, and leave it at limited. And then of course we'll set our target, which is that Panasonic. So same as before, we'll come up to the top for the split screen. We have our Sony footage selected. I'll hold Control and we'll click on the Panasonic footage. Now we can see them side by side. Let's come up to the top and choose timeline and do the same thing as before. We can take a look at our exposure, and there is a difference in the exposure there. So with our Sony footage selected, and of course changing the top to clip, I'll adjust the exposure so that it matches the footage on the left-hand side. So we want to get rid of that green in the barrel. There's a lot more green on the side of that shed there, and it's starting to look a lot more similar now. Let's head up to timeline, and instead of just clicking off exposure, let's go ahead and go right to the false color temp. You'll notice the Sony footage is a lot cooler, a lot more blue. Because we want to make an adjustment, we'll head up to the top, change it from timeline to clip, and adjust our temperature. Again, one way will make it more blue, the other way will make it more orange. Now remember, we still have the false color settings on, so the shed colors will be a little bit different. The next step, we're going to head back up to timeline, and again, we're not going to click off the other one, we'll just click on tint, and you'll notice that the Sony footage is a lot more green. So change it back from timeline to clip, and then we'll adjust until the green disappears from our footage. Now both of them are starting to look similar. We'll head back up to the top, change it from clip to timeline, and now we can get rid of the false color. Both of these pieces of footage are starting to look a lot closer than what they started with, but we can continue to make adjustments. Let's get out of the split screen and head over to the image wipe. You'll notice here that obviously it's selecting the other footage that we had. So we'll select our Sony footage, make sure it's on clip, and then we'll right click on the footage we want to compare it to and choose the wipe timeline clip option. And as before, we can move it left and right, and we can see these side by side. We'll head back to the OpenFX overlay and we'll choose our HSL curves. So I'll select that barrel there, and the target being the Panasonic footage on the right. Now in the curves, you can see where it's made those 3 points, and you can see the outline of that hill there. In fact, if we choose saturation, you can see that that's what was adjusted most, and then the hue and the luminance. Now we can come in here and make the adjustments. I'm going to choose the lightness because it does seem that it's a little too bright. What we can do is click on that dot and move it around freely, but so that it doesn't venture too far off, we can hold down Shift. Those red lines appear, and now it only moves up and down in a straight line. So again, we're just adjusting the luminance here, and I'll make it a little bit darker so that it matches the Panasonic footage on the right. We'll do the same thing with the saturation. Click on that dot, hold down Shift, and adjust the saturation until they look similar, and it looks like it's one piece of footage. We'll change it from OpenFX overlay back to image wipe. And the next thing that we're going to focus on are those bushes in the back there. It's a little bit of a different color shift there. So back to the OpenFX overlay. And this works well, especially because the colors aren't close to each other. So I'll click on the source, and that will be our Sony footage. Head back over to the target. We want to match it to the Panasonic. And then it adjusts the color so that they're similar. I'm not going to make any additional adjustments there. That looks fine for what I need it for. Head back over to image wipe, and we can compare them side by side. The last thing I want to adjust is the side of that shed there. Once again, head back to OpenFX overlay. Let's open the HSL curves. Source being the footage on the left. Target being the footage we want to match it to. And you'll see how the footage on the left changes to match the right. Let's minimize this. Change it back to our image wipe. And now our footage is pretty much identical. Now I won't go through the entire process with this. You know what we're doing here. The additional thing that I wanted to show you is if we head over to edit sizing, I'm going to crop to the part of the image that will help us in the vector scope. So we're going to have those 6 points that are shown in the vector scope and see how well these two line up. So I'm just using the left, right, top, and bottom to crop to only that part of our footage. And then here I can do the same with the Panasonic footage. Make sure that we have that selected, head down to edit sizing, and go ahead and crop that. And again, I chose this part of our color chart because that lines up very well with our vector scope in the bottom right hand side of the screen. As before, if we choose split screen and then control to select the other footage we want to compare it to, we can see both side by side. What I'll do to make this a little more easier and obvious is to detach the vector scope from the bottom right. Now to be clear, I've already matched this footage. I've already done all the other additional steps that I outlined earlier in the video. So here we can really see how close each of these points are. If I turn it off and on, you can see how much it's shifted. Now we can't open up the OpenFX overlay to use the HSL with the split screen, so we have to go back to the image wipe. Upon doing so, you'll notice that you can only see one of those stripes on the color chart. Having our Sony footage selected, I'm going to pan over and it should appear, and there it is. So it's on our left hand side. Again, just to reiterate, the Panasonic footage is on the right. So now that we can see both, now we can change it to the OpenFX overlay. We'll expand that. We have the HSL curve selected. I'll move that over and then adjust our scopes. And actually I'll make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it easier. As mentioned, the magenta I do want to adjust a little bit. So the source being the one we want to change, the target being the one that we want to change to. And now those two magenta dots on our scope are a lot closer. As mentioned before in the other example, we can actually make very specific adjustments. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click on hue, which along with saturation is what you're seeing over on the vector scope. We'll hold down shift and then we'll make our adjustments so that those 2 points line up. Green looks pretty good, the yellow. Let's go ahead and head over to the cyan. I'll click on the top square here, that being the source, of course, and then the target being the Panasonic footage on the right, and same exact thing. If you want to focus on that part of the vector scope, I'll go to hue, hold down shift, make our adjustments so that those 2 dots line up with each other. Of course, we can go into saturation too and adjust that so that they're exactly on top of one another, but I like how close they are as it stands. I'll minimize that, close our vector scope, reset the sizing so that we don't need it anymore and we don't see it. And I'll go ahead and select our Panasonic footage, come over to sizing, reset that. Now you didn't need to see me set this up, but I put them side by side so that way the colors of each of the footage are right next to each other. So I'll make some more adjustments. I have the Sony footage selected, so I'll head back to sizing. And then I'm going to use the zoom option just so that they're roughly the same size. So of course that's going to offset them a little bit. I'll go ahead and slide that back over just so that they're right next to one another. Now, if I'm looking at the footage, it appears to me that the Sony footage on the left appears to be a little bit more saturated. That's what we have selected. So let's go ahead and make that adjustment. We'll make it a little bit less saturated. And the other thing that I'm noticing too is that the colors appear a little bit darker in that footage. So let's go ahead and adjust the exposure so that it matches the colors on the right-hand side. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the point here is that there's a seamless transition between the two. It may not look the same, obviously, with those black lines, but the colors should seamlessly flow from one to the next. Now we can continue to make other adjustments, of course, but that's getting it extremely close and making our job a lot easier. So as you saw in the video, it really isn't a one-click solution, but it helps get you there. And with all the refinements being built right into the plugin, that entirely speeds up your process. Can this be done natively in DaVinci Resolve with all the tools available? It absolutely can, but again, this is a tool that helps you speed up that entire process. Can it be done better manually? I guess that all depends on your skill level. I really appreciate the research that the team over at Cinematch did to study these different sensors and how they handle color and have it so that it maps the correct way to handle those colors within the plugin. The other great thing that they're doing is once new camera models come out, they're continuing to update their list of available options. If you're curious about all the cameras that are covered, that's in the description below. Thanks for watching. I can confidently recommend this plugin. Again, if you're interested, there's a link in the description below. And it's not an affiliate link. I just really enjoy their product and I wanted to share that with you guys. If you like what you saw here and you're not already, please subscribe to the channel. Again, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.